Hello everybody, this is Manu-S and welcome to another Eternal news episode here on EternalTitans.com. I am a bit late. I was gone for the weekend and Direwolf decided in the meantime to turn the whole game upside down basically, and people have already been waiting for me to get back and give you my thoughts on all the balance changes. So let's dive right in. Alright. So first off, we have the big rank changes. First of all, they finally nerfed Acharya Merchant, which is not that big of a surprise. I was definitely one of the people that was of the opinion that the card was a bit too good, a bit too pushed. The way they changed it is interesting though. Like the way to just significantly rebalance it would have been to just make it a 1-3 because the 4 health on top of being a ramp unit and a merchant all in one was a bit too good. Like, you would play a 1-4 ramp 3-drop without being a merchant in a lot of decks. And yeah, adding the merchant factor to that is just basically free, and merchants should not be free. Now they decided to remove the attack instead of changing the health, which doesn't even nerf the card as much in general. It kind of rebalances the card and makes it much more niche. Now some decks that happily played it before have to think twice whether or not they want to play it, because it doesn't do anything on its own anymore. Like, it became much worse in Praxis tokens. The people that were still playing it in Combre aggro basically can't justify running it anymore. Like, we didn't run it anyway, but there were some merits to running it, since it gave you a leg up in the mirror, having more access to your Sword of Unity and also getting your Sword of Unity out a turn earlier and stuff like that, and being a solid blocker when you're on defense against stuff like Teacher. But now as an 0-4 with just a couple of buff effects, not doing anything on its own, you can't really justify running it in Combre aggro anymore. You can't really play a wall. And Praxis tokens, on the other hand, has to play it still. It's really awkward because before attacking for 1 and then with Obelisk for 2 was pretty relevant, especially because there was a minor threat that you could develop into a hailstorm without losing it. And this 1 health hurts a lot more than people think. And even in defensive decks, it is still an auto-inclusion, but it is significantly worse, especially against aggressive decks. The card was very oppressive to especially fire-based aggro decks, because all your 1 health 1-drops, which you usually had like 12 of, all couldn't really attack into an Aurelian Merchant. So you already had to deal with like a non-torchable unit on turn 3, and then there's the daunting potential Titan the next turn, or if you don't deal with the Merchant in a way that gets it off the board, like you only permafrosted, for example, you might run the risk of facing down like a Worldbreaker Behemoth the turn after or something like that, or a premature Harsh Rule, and so on and so forth. So yeah, the card is a really big was a really big deal, and now has become a bit more of a control and defensive deck card, and is less universal, which is something that I dislike a bit, because the merchants should be kind of universal, and this is particularly ununiversal, if that's not even a word, but yeah, you get what I mean. But yeah, the card is still good, and most decks can keep playing it, but the more proactive decks have to think twice, and basically proactive time decks sort of lost their good merchant. Then we have Channel the Tempest. The only thing that changed basically is now it costs 9, so all the rest is equal, which I think is actually really massive and basically killed the card. I think 8 is usually the threshold for like the most expensive things you realistically can afford and want to play in a constructed deck. Because 8 is already very demanding and pretty slow, and hitting 8 power drops 8 turns in a row is already a really tall order, and only something that either control decks with a lot of card draw and a lot of power can afford to, or mid-range decks with a lot of power and like ramp units or other ramp cards. So yeah, I think this is the last we've seen of Channel the Tempest for the foreseeable future. I'm sure some people will still try to play it, but I'm pretty sure the card is unfortunately unplayable now. I don't quite get that change. I think Channel was a very balanced and moderate card. Like if you compare it to some things that similar things that exist in MTG, for example, it was still way worse, which makes sense because the games are balanced a bit differently. But in relative to like how the games are balanced, I think Channel was totally fine. But they, I guess, wanted to hit temporal control hard enough, and that's the way they decided to do it. So we have to live with it for at least for the foreseeable future. Next we have Acharya. Acharya also, all things equal, except the cost. Now she costs 8. And I think that honestly also kinda killed her for most decks, especially for the more proactive mid-range decks, like the more mid-rangey Fire Justice Shadow decks, or simply Rakano Valkyries. For control decks, she's still okay. Like, she's not as great, because hitting that 8's power in addition, especially for the way the decks were built, and that they often don't have as much card draw, is gonna be trickier, but the card will still do a reasonable job at doing what it was supposed to do in these decks. But I think in, like, say, Rakano Valkyries, the card's almost unplayable now. You can probably put one in the market for when the game just kind of naturally develops in a way where you wouldn't even play her on curve anyway, or in a matchup where the being a bit slower doesn't matter as much. But yeah, other than that, I think the card suffered heavily, and I'm a bit surprised by the change. I always kind of felt like Acharya was fine. She was kind of small in terms of stats and made up for it with resiliency and other qualities, so that sort of seemed to balance her well in my opinion. But yeah, Direwolf disagreed and took action. And I guess it's one of the cards that has been on their list for a while. And yeah, last but not least, Predatory Carnosaur. Also, not all things equal actually here. It costs 1 more, but it is also 1/1 +1/+1 bigger, which is a nice change since just making it 1 bigger would have probably killed the card. This just kind of rebalanced the card. It just didn't necessarily make it way better or way worse. It just kind of made it different. There's not a lot of 7-drops these time decks usually play, so it still kind of slots in reasonably well. Especially a lot of lists had like their 4 primary 6-drops, like Heart of the Vault or whatever, and then add a couple of Carnosaurs, so it doesn't hurt that much. You just play your Heart on 6 and then your Carnosaur on 7 power. And you actually get the benefit now of killing basically every unit with Carnosaur without any help, so no need for Obelisk. Not that I thought most Carnosaur decks should have ever ran Obelisk in the first place, but now they don't even need to. You can kill Tavrod. It might take a turn or two longer, but you have acceleration in time, so you might still do it on curve, especially when you're on the play. You can now kill all the Heart of the Vaults and the Worldbreaker Behemoths and the Allheads and so on without losing your Carnosaur, which is a pretty nice deal. So I feel like the card is gonna be a bit more pushed towards being a sort of mid-range breaker now and less universally good. Like it's gonna be a lot worse against more aggressive decks, like very aggressive mid-range and aggro decks compared to before. But in turn, it will be much, much better in mid-range mirrors, especially in time mid-range mirrors. And it's still as good against Acharya as it used to be because Carnosaur got 1 more expensive, so did Acharya, so that dynamic didn't change either. Alright, so now there's a whole lot of draft changes, and 1 or 2 of those are affecting Constructed a lot more than they probably do with draft. Okay, so let's take a look. First we have the buffs. Gravemarker Oni went from 5 to 4 cost. That's the guy that I think for tribute gets you, I think, a weapon out of your deck in your hand, if I'm not mistaken. I think it's like a 3-4 or 3-3. Then we have Rusty Granite Motive, went from 1-4 to 2-4, which is actually potentially a relevant change to Constructed. The card is kind of interesting and has some potential Constructed implications, and as a 2-4 definitely is a bit more playable, attacks better, blocks better, with the Berserk hits for 4 instead of 2, and so on. Then we have War Painter, another buff to fire in limited, used to be an 0-4. Now it's a 1-4, it's the 3-cost unit with Inspire, giving, I think, the units +1/+0. Not sure if it was +1/+1 or +1/+0. I think it was +1/+0. Then we have another buff to Mistress of Light. It went from 6 to 5 cost. That's actually a pretty relevant buff, and if there's ever any potential for like Radiant Wisp type synergies in Constructed, this is definitely pretty relevant to it. It's the 3/5 for now 5 that gives all your Wisps +1/+1 while she's around, and with Tribute gives all of them +2/+2 while she's around. Then Wormic Chanter. Oh no, I skipped one. Spiteful Lumen now costs 3 instead of 4. Another pretty decent change. Card was a bit weak even for limited. Now I'm sure it's pretty good in limited if you have a couple of Wisps, and even in Constructed, in Wisp synergies, the card is at least looking interesting and worth looking at. Unfortunately, I think the Wisp Radiant stuff might still just not do enough, but it's getting more and more tools, so we'll know more what happens with the next set or something. Then we have Wormic Chanter. That's the 1/1 for 5, double time and for 5. That makes a 7/7 worm with Tribute and can turn into, I think, a 4/4 or 5/5 for spending 5 power. And now the 1/1 body naturally has Deadly, which makes it a lot better. Like, playing this on turn 4 when you're behind was nearly impossible, because playing a 1/1 on your 5th turn is devastating, and now you can just play this Deadly unit, especially if you can turn on Tribute, use the Deadly unit to trade with their biggest ground guy, and then drop the worm afterwards. And even if you don't get the worm out of it, you at least get an okay Deadly unit out of it that you can also buff to pressure the opponent. Then we have Cliffside Caretaker, went from 6 to 5, another very reasonable change. The card was ridiculously expensive. It's the 2/4 that gives your units flying with Inspire. Then we have Entangling Vines. The change to 2 power is drastic. Very surprised by that. That makes the card almost interesting for Constructed. It's basically Flash Freeze at non-fast speed with Warp, and the fact that it costs 2 and has Warp now makes it actually a potentially Constructed playable card if there would be a deck that would want it. But it's definitely a card to keep in the back of your head for Constructed now, if you're working on stuff, basically. Then we have After Image. Went from 3 to 2 cost. Warp. Unit of your choice. One of your units gets unblockable until end of turn. Then Feral Spitling went from 2 cost to 1 cost. It's the 1/1 that gives all your Radiance plus X attack, where X is the amount of units in your void. And another potentially interesting change is Lock Horns. Went from 2 cost to 1 cost. It's the +3/-1 combat trick and Shadow. Then they have so-called side buffs, like rebalances, as I called them before. Although you could consider them almost buffs in most, or in a lot of those cases, like Flamefang Charmer now costs 2 and is only a 2/2, so it lost 1 health but also 1 power, so all in all pretty good trade-off. Definitely another decent buff to fire and limited. Living Example got nerfed a bit and make it more restrictive by costing double time, but now is a 2/2. Master at Arms is a massive change and a pretty interesting one for Constructed. went from 3 cost and single justice to 2 cost and double justice, making the card a real contender for constructed. I think this card is looking pretty appealing for constructed now, so definitely gonna be messing around with this. Also, Snowfall Trumpeter now also costs double primal, so they made a lot of these good 2-drops now hard to play and forcing you to commit heavily to the color they are in. But that also means if your Snowfall Trumpeter doesn't come down on 2 and gets tributed on turn 3 or 4 or 5, you suddenly get a 2-cost 4/4, which is really good and limited, especially in constructed. Unlikely to make it. If tribute was very easy to enable, the card would actually even be interesting in constructed. Since a 2-cost 4/4 is nothing to sneeze at. Yeah. Betray the Cause was double Shadow and 5. I think, if I'm not mistaken, that's the 5-cost Warp Madness. And now it costs 4, but triple Shadow, making it another heavy Shadow tool. Also buffing Shadow a bit in limited, I guess. Yeah, and then we have Last Right Target Caller, another one of these good generic 2-drops that is now hard to cast. It costs double Shadow, but it also is a 3/2 now instead of a 2/2. The unit that gives quick draw on Inspire. Yeah, and then a couple of nerfs. Pensive Lumen lost 1 health. Was apparently a bit too good with Tribute. Stinging Wind was probably a bit too good at blocking up the air. Now with 3/3, so it trades with a lot more flyers, making it much more manageable. Then we have a nerf to Vital Arcana. Now only gains 2 health instead of 4 health. I have no idea why this is under the draft nerfs. This is a massive constructed nerf. Vital Arcana, in my opinion, went from decently playable to almost unplayably bad, since you basically pay 2 more than Wisdom, and it's not fast, and you only gain 2 health for the 2 extra power. That's an awful ratio. Like, I think they could have at least made the card fast now to make up for it. Now the card is super clunky and doesn't even recuperate much in terms of health to make up for the loss in tempo. The card just basically dead now. So that's the third massive and sort of secret nerf to tempo. Graceful Calligrapher lost 1 attack, making it line up a lot worse. Then Minus Canary, pretty surprising change, now costs 3 instead of 2. Apparently it was also a bit too good at locking up the air, I don't know. Now it's pretty bad. I didn't think, and I think most people didn't think the card was that good in limited. It was okay, especially in defensive decks, but not a great card. And now it seemed like a pretty bad card. Rampart Arbalest indeed was a powerhouse in limited, and now got changed from 1/6 to 1/5, making it line up a bit worse, but it's still a 4/5 the turn it comes down. So it can still kill a lot of things without dying, but some things don't work out anymore. So it's definitely gonna be weaker, but still gonna be a good card, I think. And Spear Diver went from 5 cost for a 2/5 flying Berserk to a 6 cost flying 2/5 Berserk, which is also surprising change. The card seemed good to me, but not great. And now I think the card's underwhelming or even maybe bad. So yeah, that's all the changes. Couple of constructed relevant ones in these draft changes. I guess they made those changes due to draft, but they also affect constructed. Especially the Arcana one is very surprising as a draft change, and especially given how much it affects constructed, it's basically killing the card. Okay, that was a lot of cards to go over. I think this is some pretty big shakeup. We'll see how things shake out. Temple Control, the way it exists, is dead now. Aurelian Merchant definitely got a bit more niche and a bit more specialized. Valkyries in the way it existed is dead. There might be another big Volcano deck, as we saw this weekend. People are messing around with Telut as the top end, and we'll see how well that's gonna be doing long term. But yeah, might mean that kind of big Volcano mid-range decks might only be a tier 2 deck going forward. We'll have to see how these change and adapt. And yeah, Carnosaur is still pretty much the good card that it used to be. It's just a bit more specialized now, just like Merchant, but still in a better place than Merchant even, I would argue. Yeah, that's it for my take on all the changes and how they're gonna affect us in the week to come. And we'll see how the metagame shakes out on the next test tournament coming up this weekend. So if you're not aware, there's another test tournament starting on Friday the 19th. We'll see what they changed to the tournament and the tournament structure. I haven't seen any info on that. Maybe I missed it while I was away, but I couldn't see anything that they said so far on how the tournament structure will be, if and what they changed and why. So curious to see that and hope there are some good improvements, because there were a bunch of things, as you might know, that I was unhappy with regarding the format of the first tournament. But yeah, that's it again for today. As usual, make sure to follow me on Twitter and Facebook if you're not doing so already. Check out our team website, eternaltitans.com, if you're not watching through that. And yeah, if you enjoyed the video, please like and leave a comment. Let me know what you think about all of these changes, or if you have any questions. And of course, if you want to support us, please consider whitelisting eternaltitans.com and YouTube. That would really help a lot. And yeah, that's it again for today. I'm your host, Manues. This was Eternal News with balance patch 1.39. I thank you for watching, and I see you next time. Bye.